My name is Morgan Reynolds, 29 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I was part of a close-knit family in Boston. Every Sunday, we'd gather for dinner, a tradition that continued even after my father's death 3 years ago. I never suspected anything was wrong until that fateful Sunday when I arrived early and heard hushed voices coming from my father's old office. Standing frozen in the hallway, I watched through the cracked door as my mother and sister hunched over documents, practicing my signature repeatedly. Before I continue with this story that turned my life upside down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about family betrayal and finding strength when those closest to you become strangers. The Reynolds family has been a fixture in Boston's business community for decades. My father, James Reynolds, built a successful real estate development company from scratch, turning a small operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise that transformed several neighborhoods across the city. Growing up, I idolized him. While my mother Diane and my older sister Amber shared a special bond over fashion, social events, and charity committees, I was the one who followed my father to construction sites, wearing a too large hard hat and taking notes in a small notebook. "You've got the head for business, Morgan," he'd say proudly. "You understand that we're not just building structures, we're creating communities." After graduating with my business degree, I joined Reynolds Development officially. Unlike many children of wealthy business owners, I insisted on starting in an entry-level position. I wanted to understand every aspect of the company, just as my father had. For 5 years, I worked my way up, eventually becoming the financial director at 26, a position I earned through merit, despite some whispers of nepotism. My sister Amber, on the other hand, never showed much interest in the business beyond attending the occasional charity gala or ribbon-cutting ceremony. She had a marketing degree she barely used, preferring to manage her lifestyle blog and Instagram presence, where she showcased our family's affluent lifestyle. Despite her minimal involvement, my father ensured she received equal shares in the company in his will. When my father died unexpectedly from a heart attack 3 years ago, our family dynamic shifted dramatically. My mother, who had always been the elegant hostess and supportive wife with little involvement in business matters, suddenly wanted to be more involved. I welcomed this initially, thinking grief had awakened a desire to connect with my father's legacy. The structure of my father's will was straightforward but specific. My mother, Amber, and I each received equal shares in Reynolds Development. I retained my position as financial director, with my mother taking the ceremonial role of chairwoman. There were also personal trust funds for each of us with specific requirements and restrictions, particularly regarding large withdrawals or property transfers, which required multiple signatures. Throughout these changes, my boyfriend Nathan Mitchell had been my rock. We met at a business conference 6 years ago, and unlike other men I'd dated, he was neither intimidated by my family's wealth nor interested in exploiting it. As a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, he had his own career ambitions and understood my dedication to mine. "Your family is intense," he'd observed more than once, particularly after Sunday dinners. "There's this undercurrent I can't quite place." I dismissed his concerns, attributing them to the natural tension that exists in most families, especially those running a business together. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to Nathan's outsider perspective. Our Sunday dinner tradition had started with my grandmother Eleanor decades ago. Even as the family fortune grew, she insisted we maintain this connection. "Money changes many things," she would say, "but it should never change the importance of breaking bread together." After my grandfather passed, she moved into a smaller home but still insisted the whole family gather weekly, now at my parents' Beacon Hill townhouse. After my father died, these dinners became both comforting and painful. We maintained the tradition, though the empty chair at the head of the table was a constant reminder of our loss. My mother insisted on keeping everything exactly as it had been. The formal dining room, the 3-course meals prepared by their longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan, the discussions of business and community events. I found solace in these structured gatherings, believing they kept us connected as a family despite our different paths. My mother would share news from her social circles, Amber would talk about her latest collaborations or travels, and I would give brief updates on company projects. We maintained a facade of familial harmony that I never thought to question. My cousin Elaine occasionally joined us, especially after her divorce. She and Amber had always been close, having attended the same private school and later the same college. My Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert would come for holiday dinners or special occasions, but the core Sunday gatherings remained just for the immediate family. I had no idea that beneath the surface of these gatherings, resentments were festering and plans were being made that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. In hindsight, there were subtle signs. My mother and Amber exchanging glances when I mentioned specific financial matters, their sudden interest in documents I brought home to review, their questions about bank access codes and signature requirements that seemed casual at the time, but now appear calculated. The life I had built, my position at the company, my relationship with Nathan, my plans for carrying forward my father's vision, was built on a foundation I believed was solid. I never imagined that the people I trusted most were systematically working to undermine everything, using my family connection against me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The Sunday evening when everything changed started like any other, except for one critical difference. I arrived early, something I rarely did. That simple change in routine would pull back the curtain on a betrayal so profound that it would force me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and trust. That fateful Sunday began unremarkably. I had spent the morning reviewing quarterly projections for a new development in the Seaport district, losing track of time until Nathan called. "Aren't you supposed to be at your mother's soon?" he reminded me. Glancing at my watch, I realized I still had over an hour before our usual 5 p.m. gathering. "I'm actually ahead of schedule for once," I replied. "Maybe I'll head over early and see if Mom needs help with anything." This spontaneous decision, arriving early instead of precisely on time as was my habit, would change everything. I pulled into the circular driveway of my childhood home, noting that only my mother's Mercedes and Amber's Range Rover were present. The house seemed unusually quiet as I let myself in with my key. Mrs. Sullivan must have been in the kitchen preparing dinner, but there was no sound of pots clanging or water running. "Hello?" I called out, receiving no response. As I moved through the foyer, I heard muffled voices coming from my father's old office, a room that had remained largely untouched since his death. The door was slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of light to escape into the dimly lit hallway. "You're still not getting it right," I heard my mother say, her voice carrying a note of frustration I rarely heard in public. "The M needs to be more rounded at the top, and the G has that distinctive loop. Morgan always presses harder at the beginning of her signature." My body went rigid at the mention of my name. Instinctively, I moved closer to the door, careful to avoid the creaky floorboard that had betrayed my childhood attempts at sneaking around. Through the crack, I could see my mother and sister hunched over my father's antique desk. Papers were spread across the surface, and Amber held a pen, practicing what I now realized was my signature on a notepad. "I've been practicing for weeks," Amber complained. "Why can't we just use the electronic signature from the last board minutes?" "Because the bank flagged that one as potentially fraudulent," my mother replied impatiently. "We need consistent, handwritten signatures for these transfers. The trust fund withdrawal especially. Lawrence will scrutinize that one carefully." Lawrence Bennett, our family attorney who had worked with my father for decades. The mention of his name in this context sent a chill through me. "Once these go through, we'll have enough control to make the bigger moves," my mother continued, shuffling through documents. "The property transfers are just the beginning." I could see Amber try again, creating a reasonable facsimile of my signature. My stomach lurched as I recognized what they were signing. Property transfer forms for our family's Cape Cod vacation home. Bank withdrawal authorizations on letterhead from my personal account, and what appeared to be company share transfer documents. My heart hammered so loudly in my chest, I feared they would hear it. A wave of nausea washed over me as I watched my mother take the pen from Amber and demonstrate again. "Look at this example from the company checkbook," she said, holding up another document. See how the N connects to the S in Reynolds? That's the detail that makes it convincing. They were studying my signature with the precision of art forgers, discussing the minutiae of my handwriting in a way that suggested they'd been at this for some time. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, but a calculated plan. My legs felt weak beneath me. I gripped the wall for support, accidentally brushing against a small decorative table. The sound, though slight, caused both women to freeze. "Did you hear something?" Amber asked, looking toward the door. I backed away silently, years of knowing every creak and groan of the old house, allowing me to retreat undetected. Making my way to the front door, I slipped outside and closed it with deliberate softness. Once safely in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white with tension. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been happening? What exactly were they planning? How much had they already taken? The betrayal felt physical, like a blow to my chest that left me struggling to breathe. I drove around the block several times, trying to process what I'd witnessed and decide on my next move. Confronting them immediately seemed like the natural response, but some instinct held me back. If they were capable of this level of deception, who knew what else they might do if cornered? Strategic retreat seemed wiser. I needed to understand the scope of their actions before confronting them. With that decision made, I composed myself as best I could and returned to the house, timing my arrival to coincide with our usual dinner hour. "Morgan, darling." My mother greeted me at the door with her usual peck on the cheek, her Chanel perfume enveloping me in a cloud that now felt suffocating. Right on time as always. I searched her face for any sign of the calculating woman I'd witnessed minutes earlier, but she wore her social mask perfectly, the gracious widow, the devoted mother. Amber appeared moments later, champagne flute already in hand, not a hint of guilt in her expression. "Work keep you busy until the last minute again?" she asked with the slightly condescending tone she'd always used when referencing my dedication to the company. "Always something that needs attention," I replied, proud that my voice remained steady despite the turmoil inside. "The Seaport project is at a critical stage." Dinner proceeded with excruciating normalcy on the surface. Mrs. Sullivan served her famous roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, my father's favorite that we maintained in his memory. We made the usual small talk, yet I noticed subtleties I might have otherwise missed. My mother asked unusually specific questions about my work schedule for the coming week. "Will you be in meetings all day Tuesday? That board presentation must be taking up so much of your attention." Amber mentioned a big change coming for the family that she was excited about, exchanging a meaningful glance with our mother that sent another wave of nausea through me. Throughout the meal, I felt their eyes on me when they thought I wasn't looking, assessing and calculating. Were they checking to see if I suspected anything? Or were they simply continuing their evaluation of my habits and patterns to better impersonate me on paper? By the time dessert was served, a lemon tart that I could barely swallow past the lump in my throat, I had made my decision. I would say nothing tonight. Tomorrow would begin my investigation into exactly how deep this betrayal went. Monday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly as I arrived at the Reynolds development offices downtown. I nodded to our receptionist and headed straight for my office, locking the door behind me, something I rarely did. With trembling hands, I logged into our financial systems. As financial director, I had complete access to every account, though in recent months I'd delegated more routine reviews to my assistant while I focused on expansion projects. Now I wondered if that delegation had created an opening for exploitation. Starting with the main company accounts, I worked methodically backward through the records. Within an hour, I'd found the first irregularity. A wire transfer of $50,000 to an unfamiliar consulting firm 3 weeks ago. My signature was on the authorization, but I had no recollection of approving it. Digging deeper, I found similar transactions dating back nearly 6 months, totaling over $300,000. Even more concerning were the missing board minutes from meetings I had no recollection of attending. Yet each document bore my signature approving significant decisions that I would have opposed. Selling a promising development property below market value, hiring consultants at exorbitant rates, restructuring reporting lines to reduce my oversight of certain projects. By mid-morning, I couldn't stay in the office any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, and each greeting from a colleague now carried the possibility of complicity. Had others noticed these irregularities? Were they involved or simply oblivious? I made a quick excuse about a meeting with an external partner and headed to First National Bank, where both the company and my personal accounts were held. Thomas Green, the bank manager, had been handling the Reynolds accounts since my father's time. His eyebrows raised when I requested a private meeting without an appointment, but he ushered me into his office immediately. "Morgan, good to see you," he said, closing the door. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to review all recent activity on my personal accounts," I said, keeping my voice low, "particularly any withdrawal requests or signature authorizations." Thomas's expression shifted subtly. "Interesting timing. We've had some concerns about recent withdrawal attempts. In fact, we placed a temporary hold on a significant transaction last week, pending additional verification." My stomach dropped. "What transaction?" He pulled up my account on his computer. "A withdrawal request for $250,000 from your trust fund. The signature matched our records, but the request pattern was unusual for your account history, which triggered our security protocols." "I never authorized that withdrawal," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas looked at me sharply, then turned his monitor so I could see the scanned authorization form. There was my signature, the M with its rounded top, the distinctive loop on the G, the heavier pressure at the beginning. To anyone else, it would appear genuine. "There have been 3 similar requests in the past month," he continued, clicking through documents. 2 were processed before our system flagged a pattern. My throat constricted. "How much?" $175,000 and $125,000, respectively. $300,000. Gone. Money that had been part of the trust my father established for me, with specific provisions for its use. "I need copies of everything," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. "And I need all my accounts frozen immediately, with new verification procedures for any withdrawals." Thomas's professional demeanor gave way to genuine concern. "Morgan, if what you're suggesting is true, this is a serious matter. Bank fraud, identity theft." "I know," I cut him off. "But before I make any formal accusations, I need to understand exactly what's happening." After leaving the bank with a folder full of transaction records, I called Harper Wilson, my best friend since college, and one of the few people in my life with no connection to Reynolds Development. She was also a practicing attorney at a firm specializing in corporate law. "I need legal advice," I told her when she picked up. "Not as a friend, but as a lawyer. Can I come by your office?" An hour later, I sat in Harper's sleek downtown office, laying out what I'd discovered so far. Her expression grew increasingly grave as I described the forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, and my accidental discovery of my mother and sister's actions. "This is substantial," she said finally, using her careful lawyer voice. "We're talking about forgery, fraud, possibly embezzlement, depending on where that company money went." "What are my options?" I asked. "Legally, you could file police reports, pursue civil action to recover the funds, petition for injunctive relief to prevent further transfers." She ticked off the options on her fingers. "But Morgan, these are serious accusations against your family. The blowback would be immediate and probably vicious." "I need to know more before I take that step," I admitted. "I need to understand why they're doing this, how far it goes." Harper nodded. "Then you need to be strategic, document everything, create secure copies of all records, and consider consulting with someone who specializes in forensic accounting." As I left Harper's office, my phone pinged with a text from my mother. "Don't forget we need those signed approvals for the riverfront project by tomorrow." The casual reminder felt sinister now. How many signed approvals had I supposedly provided without my knowledge? My next stop was to see Frederick Walsh, a former colleague of my father's, who had retired from active practice, but still consulted occasionally on complex estate matters. He had helped draft my father's will and knew its provisions intimately. Frederick welcomed me into his home office, his white eyebrows rising when I explained the purpose of my visit. "I need to see the original copy of my father's will," I said. "Not the version we've been working from, but the actual document he signed." Frederick frowned. "I provided the original to your mother after the required holding period. The copy and the company records should be identical. Could you verify that? Do you have a copy in your files?" He retrieved a thick folder from his filing cabinet and began comparing documents. After several minutes of silent review, his frown deepened. "There are discrepancies," he said slowly. "Subtle ones, but significant in their implications. The modified version in the company records had changed key provisions regarding company control in the event of disagreements among shareholders. The original provided me with additional voting rights in specific scenarios. The modified version eliminated those protections. There were also changes to the trust fund management provisions, reducing the oversight requirements for large withdrawals. As Frederick continued his review, pointing out each alteration with growing concern, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a real estate attorney in Barnstable, responding to an inquiry I'd never sent. "Miss Reynolds, I'm confirming receipt of the final signed documents for the transfer of the Cape Cod property. The new owners are eager to complete the renovation before summer. Our family vacation home, the place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, where my father had taught me to sail, where I'd envisioned eventually taking my own children, had been sold without my knowledge." The room seemed to spin around me. I gripped the edge of Frederick's desk, feeling as if the ground beneath me was crumbling away. "Morgan?" Frederick's concerned voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" "No," I answered honestly. "I'm not all right at all." That evening, I finally broke down in Nathan's apartment, showing him everything I'd discovered. His initial shock gave way to protective anger. "You need to confront them," he insisted. "This is criminal, Morgan." "I will," I promised. "But first I need to understand exactly what they're trying to do. This isn't just about money. They're systematically undermining my position in the company and erasing my father's intentions." As I fell into a restless sleep that night, one question kept circling in my mind. Was this betrayal new, or had it been in motion even while my father was alive? After 3 days of intensive investigation that left me physically exhausted and emotionally raw, I decided it was time to confront my mother. I chose to meet her at Revere's, a small cafe near the public garden that offered privacy without being completely isolated. Public enough to discourage a scene, private enough for honest conversation. I arrived early, selecting a corner table with a view of the entrance. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged the folders containing copies of the forged documents, bank statements, and property records I'd gathered. The evidence was overwhelming, yet some small part of me still hoped for an explanation that wouldn't destroy our family completely. My mother arrived precisely on time, elegant as always in a tailored navy dress and pearls, the very picture of Boston propriety. She smiled as she spotted me, but her expression faltered slightly at the sight of the documents spread before me. "Morgan, darling," she said, kissing my cheek before taking the seat opposite. "This looks serious. Is there a problem with one of the projects?" I studied her face, searching for any trace of guilt or apprehension, but saw only her usual composed mask. How many times had she maintained that same pleasant expression while systematically undermining me? "I think you know why I wanted to meet," I said quietly, sliding a copy of the forged trust fund withdrawal toward her. "This is not my signature, though it's a remarkable facsimile." Her expression didn't waver. "What are you talking about? Of course that's your signature. You signed it last month when we discussed reallocating some of the trust investments." The casual lie, delivered with such conviction, momentarily made me doubt myself. Had we discussed this? No. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd experienced my whole life, making me question my own memory and judgment. "We never had that conversation," I said firmly. "Just like we never discussed selling the Cape House or transferring company shares, or any of these other documents bearing my forged signature." My mother's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Morgan, I'm worried about you. You've been working yourself to exhaustion lately. These memory lapses. Stop it, I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. I saw you and Amber in Dad's office on Sunday, practicing my signature. I heard you discussing how to make the forgery more convincing. For a brief moment, surprise flashed in her eyes before her composure returned. She took a sip of water. Buying time. You're clearly under tremendous stress, she said finally. Perhaps we should consider having you take a break from your responsibilities at the company for a while. I've noticed some concerning behaviors recently. Forgotten meetings, erratic decisions. The audacity of her gaslighting stunned me. She was laying groundwork to question my mental stability, maybe even my competence to run the company. I have records of every unauthorized transaction, I continued, pulling out more documents. The bank flagged several withdrawals as suspicious. The property transfer for the Cape House was completed without proper authorization. And I've spoken with Frederick Walsh about the alterations made to Dad's will. At the mention of Frederick, something in her demeanor shifted. She placed her water glass down carefully, her knuckles white around the stem. Your father built that company from nothing, she said, her voice low and suddenly devoid of its usual warmth. Do you think he intended for it to be run into the ground by a daughter who lacks the vision to take necessary risks? Reynolds' development needs decisive leadership, not your cautious, plodding approach. So you decided to simply take what isn't yours? I challenged. To steal from me and undermine my position? We're helping the company, she shot back, making decisions that need to be made while you cling to your father's outdated policies. This isn't theft, it's survival. The property sale, the fund reallocations, they're providing capital for opportunities you're too conservative to pursue. Her partial confession, framed as justified intervention rather than criminal activity, left me momentarily speechless. Before I could respond, she pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. Your sister should be part of this conversation, she said. Since you're determined to create drama over what's ultimately a family matter. 10 minutes later, Amber arrived, sliding into the seat beside our mother with a united front that made my isolation complete. Where my mother was cool and composed, Amber went immediately on the offensive. What exactly are you accusing us of, Morgan? She demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Forgery, fraud, theft, I listed calmly. Conspiring to undermine my position in the company, selling family property without proper authorization. Should I continue? Amber rolled her eyes dramatically. God, you've always been so melodramatic. We're making necessary business moves while you're paralyzed by trying to be Dad's clone. The company needs to evolve. By stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from my trust? By selling our family vacation home without telling me? My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. That house was sitting empty most of the year, Amber countered. An underperforming asset that's now generating capital for actual growth. It wasn't yours to sell. It belonged to the family, my mother interjected. And majority decisions must sometimes be made for the good of all, even when one member disagrees. Their coordinated responses made it clear they'd anticipated this confrontation and prepared accordingly. For every document I presented, they had a justification ready, plausible enough to create doubt for any outsider, though completely contradicted by what I'd overheard them discussing. You're outvoted, Morgan, my mother said finally. 2-1. That's how family businesses work sometimes. If you can't accept that, perhaps you should consider your options. The implied threat hung in the air between us. I gathered my documents with shaking hands. This isn't about votes, I said quietly. It's about legality and trust. What you've done isn't just morally wrong, it's criminal. I'm giving you one opportunity to return the funds and reverse what transactions can still be reversed before I take this further. My mother's expression shifted to something I'd rarely seen, cold calculation without the usual veneer of maternal warmth. Consider very carefully before you make accusations you can't take back, Morgan. Your position at the company, your reputation in the community, these things are more fragile than you might think. As I left the cafe, the full weight of their betrayal crushed down on me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a well-intentioned overreach. This was a calculated campaign to take what they wanted, regardless of ethics, law, or family bonds. And they were prepared to destroy me if I stood in their way. The week following my confrontation with my mother and sister revealed betrayals deeper than I had initially imagined. Armed with what I knew, I began methodically reviewing company records going back further than my initial investigation. What I found left me breathless with shock and growing anger. Meeting minutes revealed board sessions I had supposedly attended while I was verifiably elsewhere, in one case, at a conference in Chicago that had been documented with photos and attendee records. Another emergency meeting had supposedly taken place while I was on a weekend hiking trip with Nathan in the White Mountains, completely out of cell range. These phantom meetings had approved significant changes to company structure and policy, gradually removing oversight mechanisms I had implemented and redistributing decision-making authority away from my position as financial director. One particularly egregious resolution, bearing my forged signature, approved preliminary steps to merge with a competitor I had specifically advised against partnering with due to their questionable financial practices. Most alarmingly, I discovered a formal proposal, apparently awaiting final approval at the next board meeting, to remove me as financial director entirely, citing erratic decision-making and increasingly concerning management choices. The document was dated 3 months earlier, but had been hidden from the regular board packet distribution. With mounting dread, I realized this wasn't just about money. My mother and sister were systematically dismantling my position within Reynolds Development while building a case that I was mentally unstable or professionally incompetent. I needed to confront Amber directly, without our mother's moderating presence. Unlike my mother, who maintained a calculating composure, Amber had always been more volatile and more likely to reveal uncomfortable truths in moments of anger. I tracked her to her favorite upscale gym, timing my arrival to coincide with the end of her regular Tuesday Pilates session. I intercepted her in the parking lot as she walked to her car. "We need to talk," I said, stepping into her path. Amber jumped, then glared at me. "Stalking is beneath you, Morgan. If you have something to say, make an appointment like a normal person." "I think we're well past normal at this point, don't you?" I held up a folder containing the proposal for my removal. "Care to explain this?" She barely glanced at it. "The company needs leadership that isn't afraid to take risks. You've become a liability." "A liability to what? The company's success? Our profits are up 17% year over year under my financial direction." "A liability to growth," she snapped, her composure cracking. "Do you think Dad built this company by playing it safe? By squirreling away profits instead of leveraging assets? Dad built this company through calculated risks and ethical business practices," I countered. "Not fraud and embezzlement. God, you were always Daddy's perfect little protege, weren't you?" Amber's voice dripped with resentment. "Morgan knows best. Morgan gets the real responsibility while I get patted on the head and told to look pretty at charity events. Well, guess what? I'm done living in your shadow." The raw jealousy in her voice took me aback. "This is about Dad favoring me? This is about finally getting what's rightfully mine," she hissed. "Half of that company should have been mine from the beginning, not split 3 ways with the understanding that you'd have operational control. I'm not just the pretty face, Morgan. I have ideas and vision that you're too risk-averse to even consider. So you decided to forge my signature and steal my money, instead of, I don't know, having an actual conversation about your ideas?" Her laugh was bitter. "As if you would have listened. You've never respected my input." This revisionist history stunned me. I had repeatedly invited Amber to take a more active role in the company over the years, offering her projects to lead and teams to manage. She had always declined, claiming she wasn't interested in the day-to-day operations. Before I could point this out, she delivered the final blow. "It doesn't matter anymore. By next month, the board will vote for new leadership, and you'll be lucky if we let you keep your shares as a silent investor." She pushed past me to her car, leaving me standing in the parking lot with the realization that this coup had been in planning for far longer than I'd suspected. 2 days later, my mother orchestrated what she framed as a family meeting at her house, inviting not just Amber but also my Aunt Patricia, Uncle Robert, and my grandmother Eleanor. I knew immediately it was a setup, but I attended anyway, determined to hear what narrative they were spinning to the extended family. The living room was arranged like a tribunal, with my mother and sister seated together on the sofa, while the others occupied chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. The only open seat was positioned directly across from them, clearly meant for me. "Morgan, thank you for coming," my mother began with rehearsed concern. "We've asked everyone here because we're worried about you." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. My mother described my increasingly paranoid behavior, my unfounded accusations against family members, and my concerning focus on conspiracy theories about company funds. Amber chimed in with anecdotes about my supposed memory lapses and erratic decision-making. "We're considering having her take a medical leave," my mother concluded, addressing my aunt and uncle rather than me. "Her father's death affected her deeply, and I fear she's having a delayed breakdown of sorts." The surreal experience of sitting quietly while my closest family members discussed my supposed mental instability nearly broke me. Only the knowledge that this was exactly what they wanted, an emotional outburst they could point to as evidence, kept me composed. "May I speak?" I asked finally, my voice steady despite my racing heart. My grandmother, who had remained silent throughout the character assassination, nodded. "I think that would be appropriate." With methodical calm, I presented the evidence I'd brought. Bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals, documents bearing forged signatures, property records for the Cape House sale I'd never approved. I explained how I'd discovered them practicing my signature and outlined the systematic campaign to undermine my position at the company. My aunt looked troubled, my uncle skeptical. But it was my grandmother's reaction that surprised me most. Rather than appearing shocked, she seemed to be studying each document with careful consideration, occasionally glancing between my mother and me with an unreadable expression. "These are serious allegations," my uncle said finally. "If true—" "If?" my mother interrupted incredulously. "Robert, surely you don't believe these fantasies. Morgan has clearly fabricated these documents as part of her paranoid narrative." The conversation devolved from there, with my mother and sister presenting a united front of concern for my mental health, while dismissing all evidence as either fabricated or misunderstood. By the end, my aunt was suggesting names of discreet psychiatric facilities where I might rest and recover. I left the house feeling more isolated than ever. In the space of a week, I had been branded as unstable, paranoid, and possibly dangerous to the company I had helped build. The narrative was spreading beyond my immediate family, potentially poisoning business relationships and friendships before I could even defend myself. The following morning, I arrived at the office to find my key card denied access to the executive floor. My assistant met me in the lobby, visibly uncomfortable as she handed me a letter. "The board held an emergency session last night," she explained, unable to meet my eyes. They've placed you on administrative leave, pending a review of your position." The letter, bearing the company letterhead and my mother's signature as chairwoman, cited concerning behaviors and potential conflicts of interest as justification for my immediate removal from daily operations. My access to company systems had been revoked, my email redirected, my projects reassigned. In one swift move, they had leveraged their forged documentation and carefully cultivated rumors to cut me off from the company my father had built and that I had helped grow. The betrayal was complete. As I stood in the lobby of Reynolds Development, clutching the termination letter while employees I had worked alongside for years hurried past with averted eyes, I realized the true scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just about money or power. My mother and sister were systematically erasing my place in the family legacy, rewriting the narrative to cast me as unstable and unfit while positioning themselves as the rightful stewards of my father's vision. Only one person seemed unmoved by the character assassination campaign. As I was leaving the building, my phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother. "Come see me tomorrow, alone." That small message, 4 words from the family matriarch, who had remained inscrutable during the family meeting, gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in days. Perhaps I wasn't completely alone in this fight after all. The day after my humiliating dismissal from Reynolds Development, I returned to my apartment to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a psychological evaluation appointment scheduled for the following week with Dr. Marcus Hoffman, a psychiatrist I'd never heard of. The referral form, apparently signed by my primary physician, another forgery, cited concerns about persecutory delusions and increasing paranoia affecting professional judgment. My hands shook as I researched Dr. Hoffman online. He specialized in evaluating competency for legal proceedings and had testified in several high-profile conservatorship cases. The implications were chilling. This wasn't just about removing me from the company. My mother and sister were laying groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent. Nathan found me still staring at the computer screen when he arrived an hour later, having rushed over after my distressed call. "They're trying to have me committed," I said, showing him the appointment notice. He read it, his expression darkening. "This is insane. They can't possibly succeed." "Can't they?" I pulled up the documents I'd been gathering. "Look at the narrative they've built. Increasingly erratic behavior, paranoid accusations against family members, sudden obsession with conspiracy theories about company funds. They've created a paper trail of concern dating back months. They've isolated me from family members who might have supported me. They've removed me from the company where I could access exonerating evidence." I pulled up one more document, a partially redacted email I'd managed to download before my company access was revoked, sent from my mother to our family attorney. It mentioned a conservatorship filing and contingency plans if she becomes difficult. "This was never just about money or company control," I said, the full realization hitting me anew. "They want everything, my shares, my trust fund, my inheritance, and they're willing to destroy me to get it." Nathan's protective anger was immediate. "We need to act now. Go to the police, file for injunctions, get ahead of this before." "Before what?" I interrupted. "Before they convince everyone I'm having a mental breakdown? It might already be too late." The next morning, I kept my appointment with my grandmother. She lived in a stately brownstone in Back Bay that she had refused to leave even after my grandfather's death, valuing her independence too much to move in with any of her children as they had suggested. Eleanor Reynolds had always been a formidable woman. At 78, she retained both her sharp mind and her direct manner of speaking. When I arrived, she ushered me into her study without preamble, closing the door firmly behind us. "I wondered when this day would come," she said, gesturing for me to sit while she lowered herself into an armchair. "History has an unfortunate way of repeating itself in this family." For the next hour, my grandmother revealed a family history I'd never known. My mother's calculating nature hadn't developed overnight. She had orchestrated similar manipulations of my father early in their marriage, attempting to wrest control of his growing business through a combination of forgery, gaslighting, and leveraging social connections. My father had discovered the deception and confronted her, but ultimately chose to remain in the marriage for the sake of his daughters, implementing strict financial controls to prevent future exploitation. "Your father protected the company and his assets, but he never fully addressed the root problem," my grandmother explained. "Diane's resentment only grew over the years, especially as he groomed you to take over the financial aspects of the business rather than her." "Why didn't he divorce her?" I asked, struggling to reconcile this new information with my understanding of my parents' relationship. "Pride, appearances, concern for you girls," she sighed. "James was a brilliant businessman, but conflict-averse in his personal life. He chose containment over confrontation." She rose slowly and moved to an antique secretary desk in the corner, removing a key from her necklace to unlock a hidden drawer. From it, she withdrew a sealed envelope. "Your father knew your mother better than you might think," she said, handing me the envelope. "He suspected something like this might happen after he was gone." Inside was a letter dated just weeks before my father's unexpected death, addressed to me but entrusted to my grandmother. In it, he detailed his concerns about my mother's ambitions and my sister's malleable nature. He warned me to be vigilant about the company's governance and his estate. Most importantly, he revealed the existence of a separate trust he had established without my mother's knowledge, containing additional company shares that would give me controlling interest if combined with my existing ownership. The trust activates automatically if certain conditions are met, my grandmother explained. Your father arranged it as insurance against exactly this type of situation. The revelation left me breathless. Even from beyond the grave, my father was trying to protect me and his company legacy. But there was a problem. The documentation, I said. It would be with his personal attorney, not the family lawyer who's clearly working with Mom now. Lawrence Bennett, my grandmother confirmed. He's retired but still maintains some select client relationships. Your father trusted him completely. As I left my grandmother's house with the letter securely in my possession, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from my mother, sister, and even my aunt, all urging me to get help and stop making things worse. The final message was the most chilling, to an invitation to Sunday dinner with the family to discuss my future care. I showed Nathan the messages when I returned to his apartment, where I'd been staying since being locked out of my company-owned condo. It's a trap, he said immediately. They're planning something. I nodded, scrolling through the invitation again. They mentioned a doctor will be joining us, probably this Dr. Hoffman, who specializes in competency evaluations. They're setting up an intervention, complete with medical authority to potentially have me committed if I act irrationally. You can't go, Nathan insisted. I have to, I countered. If I refuse, they'll use it as further evidence that I'm paranoid and avoiding family concern. I need to appear at least somewhat cooperative while I work with Lawrence Bennett to activate my father's contingency trust. The next morning, I arranged to meet Lawrence Bennett at his home office, bringing my grandmother along for both moral support and additional credibility. The elderly attorney was clearly troubled by my account of recent events, especially the forgeries and unauthorized transactions. Your father feared something like this might happen, he confirmed, retrieving a sealed file from his personal safe. That's why he established the contingency trust with such specific triggering conditions. He spread the documents before us, pointing out the key provisions. My father had placed an additional 15% of company shares in this separate trust, which would transfer automatically to me if there was any attempt to remove me from my position as financial director through means other than my voluntary resignation or documented gross negligence. The forgeries and false board meetings would qualify as triggering events, Lawrence confirmed after reviewing my evidence. This gives you controlling interest in Reynolds' development, 48% compared to their combined 45%. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of hope. With controlling interest, I could reverse my removal, replace the compromised board members, and begin untangling the financial damage my mother and sister had caused. How quickly can we execute this? I asked. I can file the necessary paperwork immediately, Lawrence replied. But there's a complication. Your mother has already filed a petition for temporary conservatorship over your affairs, citing mental health concerns. We'll need to counter that first. Or she could potentially gain control over the trust shares as well. The news of the conservatorship filing, though expected, hit me like a physical blow. My own mother was attempting to have me legally declared incompetent to manage my own affairs, the ultimate betrayal of both my trust and my father's intentions. The Sunday dinner, I realized with growing dread. That's when they're planning to make their move. They'll have the doctor there, family members as witnesses, probably even a lawyer, to expedite the process if I demonstrate concerning behavior. Which is exactly what they'll claim no matter how you actually behave, Nathan pointed out. I spent the next 2 days preparing for both the legal battle and the Sunday confrontation. Lawrence filed counter-petitions challenging the conservatorship attempt and activating my father's contingency trust. I arranged for a psychiatric evaluation with an independent doctor recommended by Harper, establishing my mental competence ahead of any forced evaluation. As Sunday evening approached, I felt a strange calm descend. The magnitude of betrayal had moved beyond pain into a cold clarity of purpose. This would be the final confrontation, the moment when all pretenses would be dropped and the true nature of what my mother and sister had become would be revealed not just to me, but to anyone else present. Nathan dropped me off 2 blocks from my mother's house, reluctantly agreeing to my request that he remain nearby but not accompany me inside. If something goes wrong, if you don't hear from me within 2 hours, call Harper, I instructed him. She has all the documentation and Lawrence's contact information. The house was fully lit when I arrived, more cars than usual parked in the circular drive. I recognized my aunt and uncle's sedan, my cousin Elaine's sporty convertible, and an unfamiliar luxury car that likely belonged to Dr. Hoffman. My grandmother had insisted on arriving separately, not wanting to tip our hand too early. My mother answered the door herself, her concerned expression so convincing that for a moment I almost doubted my own certainty about her intentions. "Morgan, darling, thank you for coming," she said, embracing me with perfectly calibrated maternal affection. "We're all so worried about you." The living room had been arranged much like the previous family meeting, but with additional participants: Dr. Hoffman, a man I assumed was his associate, my mother's personal attorney rather than the family lawyer, and a nurse in professional attire. It was exactly the ambush I had anticipated, yet seeing it prepared so blatantly still sent a chill through me. "What's this?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well. "A family discussion about your health and well-being," my mother replied smoothly. "Given your recent concerning behavior, we thought it best to have some professional guidance." Dr. Hoffman stepped forward, extending his hand. "Miss Reynolds, I'm Dr. Marcus Hoffman. Your family has shared some concerns about changes in your behavior and thought patterns. I'm here to help assess whether you might benefit from a structured therapeutic environment." The euphemism for institutionalization wasn't lost on me. I remained standing, ignoring his outstretched hand. "This isn't a medical intervention," I said clearly, addressing the room rather than just the doctor. "This is an attempt to have me declared incompetent so my mother and sister can take control of my assets and company shares." My mother's practiced concern didn't falter. "You see, doctor, these paranoid delusions about financial conspiracies are exactly what we've been worried about." "Paranoid delusions?" I echoed. "Like the forged signatures you and Amber have been using to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from my accounts? Or the falsified board minutes for meetings that never occurred? Or perhaps the backdated psychiatric referrals to build a case for conservatorship?" Amber stepped forward, her expression a perfect blend of sadness and concern. "Morgan, please, you need help. These elaborate stories you've created are documented and verified," came my grandmother's voice from the doorway. She entered the room with Lawrence Bennett beside her, each carrying folders of documents, "and have been submitted to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." The room erupted in confusion. My mother's mask of concern slipped for the first time, revealing the cold calculation beneath. She turned to her attorney, speaking in urgent whispers while Dr. Hoffman looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. In the chaos that followed, as my mother realized her carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling, she finally dropped all pretense. "You ungrateful child," she hissed when we found ourselves momentarily separated from the others. "Everything I've done was for this family." "No," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Everything you've done was for yourself. Dad saw it years ago, which is why he protected the company from you. He knew who you really were." Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. "And now everyone will know who you really are. The unstable daughter who fabricated criminal accusations against her grieving mother and sister. Even if you avoid commitment today, your reputation will never recover." Her threat might have worked weeks earlier, but now it only confirmed what I already knew. There was no reconciliation possible, no misunderstanding to resolve. My mother and sister had been willing to destroy me completely to get what they wanted. The family I thought I had existed only in my memory. As Lawrence Bennett presented the activation of my father's contingency trust, giving me controlling interest in Reynolds' development, I watched the final desperate calculations play across my mother's face. She had lost not just the company control she coveted, but also her carefully constructed social persona. The criminal investigation would expose actions that even her most loyal supporters couldn't justify. I walked out of that house for the last time that evening, leaving behind not just the physical building, but the illusion of family that had sustained me since my father's death. The betrayal was complete, but so was my liberation from it. The first 24 hours after the confrontation passed in a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and fitful attempts at rest. Nathan insisted I stay at his apartment rather than return to my condo, concerned about potential retaliation from my mother and sister. In the harsh morning light, I faced the reality of my situation. While I had exposed their scheme and activated my father's contingency plan, I was still effectively locked out of Reynolds' development with my reputation under attack. "We need to be methodical," Harper advised during our strategy session that morning. Her living room had become our makeshift headquarters, with Lawrence Bennett joining remotely via video call. "Your mother and sister won't surrender control easily, despite the legal groundwork we've laid." Lawrence nodded gravely from the screen. "They've already filed objections to the contingency trust activation, claiming the triggering conditions haven't been legitimately met. They're arguing that your removal as financial director was proper board action based on legitimate concerns about your performance, which they fabricated through forged documents," I pointed out. "Exactly," he agreed. "But proving forgery requires forensic document examination and witness testimony. This will be a process, not an immediate resolution." The scale of what I was facing became increasingly clear as we outlined the battles ahead. Criminal investigations into the forgeries and fraud, civil litigation to regain company control, potential defamation suits to restore my reputation, and the ongoing defense against the conservatorship petition that, while weakened, hadn't been completely withdrawn. "You need allies," Nathan said, bringing coffee to the strategy table. "People inside the company who might have noticed irregularities or who remained loyal to your father's vision." It was a good point. Despite my mother and sister's campaign to isolate me, there would be employees who had worked closely with me for years, who might have questioned the sudden changes in company direction or my abrupt removal. My first call was to Thomas Green at First National Bank, who had already flagged the suspicious withdrawals from my accounts. With his banking expertise, he helped me trace the flow of embezzled funds through several shell companies before they disappeared into offshore accounts, providing crucial evidence for both criminal and civil cases. "The pattern suggests long-term planning," Thomas observed as we reviewed the transaction histories. "These shell companies were established over 18 months ago, well before your father's death." The timeline sent a chill through me. Had they been planning this while my father was still alive? Had his unexpected death simply accelerated an existing scheme? My next unexpected ally emerged from a chance meeting at a coffee shop near the office building. Jennifer Peters, a junior accountant at Reynolds Development who had worked directly with me on several projects, approached my table hesitantly. "Miss Reynolds? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I heard about what happened," she said, glancing nervously around as though afraid of being seen speaking to me. "Something's not right at the company. Files are disappearing, financial reports are being revised retroactively, and anyone who asks questions is being reassigned or let go." Jennifer became our inside source, discreetly documenting continuing financial irregularities and providing access to internal communications that further revealed the extent of my mother and sister's manipulations. But the most significant breakthrough came from my grandmother, who arrived at our strategy session the following day with a weathered leather case I recognized from my father's study. "I retrieved this from the storage unit where some of your father's personal effects were kept after his death," she explained, placing it on the table. "Diane never knew about this storage unit. James maintained it for decades, keeping certain documents separate from both the home and office. Inside the case were journals dating back to the early years of my parents' marriage, detailing my father's growing awareness of my mother's manipulative nature and his efforts to protect his business interests from her influence. There were also records of previous incidents similar to what I was experiencing: attempts to forge his signature, unauthorized financial transactions, and gaslighting when confronted. "Why did he stay with her?" I asked my grandmother, the question that had been haunting me since learning of this family history. Eleanor sighed deeply. The simplest answer is that he loved you girls and believed a unified family, even an imperfect one, was better than a broken home. The more complicated truth is that your father, for all his business acumen, had significant blind spots when it came to personal relationships. He believed he could manage the situation through financial controls and legal precautions rather than addressing the fundamental character issues at play. The journals also revealed something I hadn't known. My father had suspected his heart condition was more serious than he had let on to the family. The contingency trust wasn't just a precaution against my mother's ambitions. It was his attempt to protect me, knowing he might not be around much longer. He knew, I whispered, running my fingers over his familiar handwriting. He knew he was running out of time to prepare me. With this new understanding and growing evidence, we developed a comprehensive strategy. Lawrence would continue the legal battle to enforce the contingency trust and secure my position as majority shareholder. Harper would coordinate with the district attorney's office on the criminal fraud investigation. Nathan would help me prepare for the inevitable public and private confrontations ahead. I also needed to build a broader base of support. While my aunt and uncle had been initially swayed by my mother's narrative about my mental health, the documentation provided by my grandmother and Lawrence had raised serious doubts in their minds. A carefully worded email with selected evidence, sent to key family members and longtime family friends, began to counteract the poisonous rumors my mother had spread. My cousin Elaine, always closer to Amber than to me, reached out unexpectedly after receiving my email. I should have realized something was off when Amber started talking about taking over your position months ago, she admitted during our phone call. She made it sound like you were planning to step back voluntarily, but it never quite fit with what I knew about you. The support from unexpected quarters strengthened my resolve, but I knew the hardest battles were still ahead. My mother had built a network of social and business connections over decades. Many board members and key investors had personal relationships with her that predated their involvement with Reynolds' development. We need to approach this as not just a legal fight, but as a campaign for the soul of the company, I told my team during our strategy session 3 days after the confrontation. My father built Reynolds' development on principles of integrity, community investment, and sustainable growth. We need to remind everyone involved what the company stands for and what's at stake if my mother and sister retain control. With Lawrence's assistance, we prepared for an emergency shareholders meeting that would force a board vote on my reinstatement. Jennifer provided intelligence on which board members might be sympathetic to my cause and which were firmly in my mother's camp. The night before this crucial meeting, my grandmother invited me to dinner at her home, just the two of us. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said as we shared the meal she had prepared herself, dismissing her regular housekeeper for the evening, "remember that your father saw this quality in you from the time you were a little girl. The strength to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." She reached across the table to take my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for her age. "Family is important, Morgan, but integrity matters more. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same." As I left her house that evening, I felt a sense of calm purpose that had been missing since this ordeal began. The betrayal by my mother and sister had shattered my understanding of family, but it hadn't broken me. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the strength my father had seen in me and the support of the people who had proven to be my true family through their actions rather than blood ties. The emergency shareholders meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. With Lawrence's legal preparations, my grandmother's evidence, and the growing support from key company figures, I felt cautiously optimistic that we could begin to reclaim what had been taken from me. Not just my position and financial security, but my father's legacy and my own sense of purpose. As I prepared for bed that night in Nathan's apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained only 5 words, but they sent ice through my veins. "Tomorrow won't go as planned." The warning was anonymous, but the implication was clear. My mother and sister had one more card to play. The battle for Reynolds' development was far from over. The morning of the emergency shareholders meeting dawned clear and cold. a crisp October day that seemed too beautiful for the storm I was walking into. Nathan made breakfast. Neither of us could eat. The anonymous warning from the night before, hanging over us like a cloud. "We need to be prepared for anything," Lawrence advised during our pre-meeting call. "Your mother's attorney has requested to speak first, which suggests they have some strategy prepared." Arriving at the Reynolds Development headquarters felt surreal after weeks of forced absence. The security guard's surprised expression when I presented my ID confirmed that no one had expected me to appear in person. I was escorted to the boardroom by a visibly uncomfortable executive assistant who had once worked directly with me. The large mahogany table was already surrounded by board members and major shareholders when I entered. My mother and sister sat at the far end, both impeccably dressed and composed. If they were surprised by my presence, they didn't show it. My grandmother was seated near the middle, a neutral territory that seemed fitting for her role as family matriarch and bridge between warring factions. Lawrence Bennett sat beside me as the company secretary called the meeting to order, reviewing the agenda that would determine the future of Reynolds Development and my place within it. As expected, my mother's attorney rose first. Harold Winters was a shark in an expensive suit, known for aggressive corporate maneuvering and an almost pathological dedication to winning at any cost. His thin smile didn't reach his eyes as he addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the agenda items regarding Miss Morgan Reynolds' petition for reinstatement, we must address a more immediate concern," he began, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. "New information has come to light regarding the financial management of Reynolds Development under Miss Reynolds' direction that demands immediate attention." With theatrical timing, he distributed folders to each person at the table. These documents detail a pattern of questionable financial decisions, conflicts of interest, and possible misappropriation of company resources that occurred while Miss Reynolds served as financial director. I opened the folder with steady hands, already anticipating what I would find. Inside were transaction records, project approvals, and financial summaries, all genuine documents from my tenure as financial director, but presented selectively and out of context to create the appearance of impropriety. "This is their final play," Lawrence whispered to me. "Character assassination through selective disclosure." Winters continued his presentation, highlighting decisions I had made that, when stripped of their context and supporting documentation, could appear questionable to those without full information. He painted a picture of a reckless financial director pursuing pet projects against the company's best interests, a complete inversion of the truth. When he finally concluded, the room sat in uncomfortable silence. Several board members avoided my gaze, while others looked confused or concerned. My mother and sister maintained expressions of appropriate gravity, the concerned family members forced to expose painful truths for the good of the company. Lawrence prepared to respond, but I placed my hand on his arm, silently asking for the floor. This wasn't just a legal battle to be fought through proxies. It was my reputation, my father's legacy, and my future at stake. I stood, taking a moment to make eye contact with each person around the table before speaking. For 3 generations, Reynolds Development has been built on a foundation of integrity, community investment, and sustainable growth. I began, echoing the mission statement my grandfather had written and my father had expanded. These values guided my father's leadership of this company, and they have guided mine. Rather than immediately refuting the accusations, I walked them through the company's performance during my tenure as financial director, the increased profitability, the successful expansion into new markets, the awards for ethical business practices. I highlighted specific projects that Winters had characterized as pet projects, revealing their long-term strategic value and current performance metrics. "The documents you've been given tell a story," I acknowledged, "but it's an incomplete story, carefully edited to support a predetermined narrative. Let me show you what's been omitted." With Jennifer's help, I had prepared comprehensive records for each project and decision questioned in Winters' presentation. As these were distributed, I noticed several board members comparing the 2 sets of documents, their expressions shifting from concern to confusion to the beginnings of anger, not at me, but at the manipulation they were witnessing. I discovered 3 weeks ago that my mother and sister have been forging my signature on company documents, withdrawing funds from both corporate and personal accounts without authorization, and systematically undermining my position through falsified board minutes and fabricated performance issues, I continued, my voice steady, despite the enormity of what I was describing. When confronted, they escalated to attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. The shocked murmurs around the table confirmed that many board members had been kept in the dark about the true nature of my removal. My grandmother caught my eye, giving me a slight nod of encouragement. "I'm not here to ask for sympathy," I clarified. "I'm here because Reynolds Development deserves leadership that upholds the values it was founded upon. I'm here because my father entrusted me with preserving his legacy, and I intend to honor that trust." I then yielded the floor to Lawrence, who presented the legal evidence of the forgeries, unauthorized transactions, and the activation of my father's contingency trust, giving me controlling interest in the company. As he spoke, I watched the realization dawn across the room. This wasn't a family squabble or a difference of vision, but a calculated corporate coup that had nearly succeeded. My mother's composure finally cracked as the tide turned visibly against her. "This company was as much mine as James's," she declared, rising to her feet. "I stood beside him for 35 years, played the perfect corporate wife, entertained the clients and investors, raised his children, all while he made decisions without consulting me and built succession plans that excluded me." "He didn't exclude you," I countered quietly. "He protected the company from you. There's a difference." The vote that followed was decisive. The board reinstated me as financial director and accepted the validity of the contingency trust activation, giving me effective control of Reynolds Development. My mother and sister were removed from their positions, pending full investigation of the financial improprieties. As the meeting adjourned, my mother approached me, her expression a complex mixture of anger and something that might have been regret in someone capable of it. "This isn't over," she said softly. "You've won the company, but at what cost? Family is forever, Morgan. Remember that when you're celebrating your victory, you stopped being family the moment you decided to destroy me," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't try to have you committed to gain control of your assets." For a brief moment, something like genuine emotion flickered across her features before the mask returned. Without another word, she collected her belongings and left the boardroom, Amber following in her wake without even a glance in my direction. The months that followed were both challenging and healing. The criminal investigation into the forgeries and fraud moved forward, though I chose not to press for maximum penalties, preferring to focus on financial restitution and permanent removal from company operations. The family became irreparably fractured, with relatives taking sides and holiday gatherings becoming exercises in careful scheduling to avoid conflict. Reynolds Development required substantial work to undo the damage of my mother and sister's tenure. Several questionable deals had to be renegotiated, unauthorized transfers reversed, and governance procedures completely overhauled to prevent similar vulnerabilities in the future. Through it all, my support system remained steadfast. Nathan's unwavering belief in me provided emotional stability when legal and business pressures threatened to become overwhelming. Harper's legal expertise and friendship offered both practical assistance and necessary perspective. My grandmother's wisdom and connection to my father's legacy reminded me of the values worth fighting for. 6 months after the shareholders' meeting, I stood in my father's old office, now mine, looking out over the Boston skyline. The company was back on solid footing, our reputation largely recovered, our projects moving forward with renewed focus on the principles my father had established. The personal healing had been slower but equally steady. Weekly therapy sessions helped me process the profound betrayal and rebuild my sense of trust and security. I had learned to create boundaries that protected me without closing me off from genuine connection. I had accepted that family could be chosen rather than determined by blood, and surrounded myself with people whose loyalty was demonstrated rather than assumed. On my desk sat a framed photo of my father and me at a construction site, both wearing hard hats and smiling widely at some shared joke. Beside it was a more recent photo. Nathan, my grandmother, Harper, and me at the opening of our newest development, a mixed-income housing project that embodied the community investment values at the heart of Reynolds development. The ultimate betrayal had taken much from me. The family I thought I had, the sense of security I had taken for granted, the uncomplicated trust I had once given freely. But it had also revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed, connections that proved more durable than I expected, and a capacity for rebuilding that would serve me well in all aspects of life. As I prepared to leave for dinner with Nathan, where I suspected from his nervous energy that evening that a proposal might be forthcoming, I thought about the journey of the past year. From devastating discovery to rock bottom to eventual triumph, each step had shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself than I had been before. The ultimate betrayal had been survived. The healing, though ongoing, was real. And the future, despite everything, or perhaps because of it, looked brighter than ever. How have you handled betrayal in your own life? Has someone close to you ever broken your trust in a way that forced you to reevaluate your relationship? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the most painful experiences lead to the most meaningful growth. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you resilience and healing in whatever challenges you might be facing.